in the Houston Cinema Arts Festival, I was the director of the Virginia Film Festival, and Lee was on my board for 14 years, and we showed some unforgettable films. One, Mrs. Palfrey at the Claremont, starring Joan Plowright and Rupert Friend, that was came from a script that came out of your mother's drawer that she had written many years ago. Turned into a beautiful film. So, I don't know if there's such a thing as a typical producer, but Lee Caplin is definitely not a typical producer. So, he is, besides the productions you heard about that he was involved in, he's also a lawyer. And as you may have seen at the end, the film earned the literary rights from William Faulkner from Lee Caplin, executor. Lee is the executor of William Faulkner's literary estate. So, I think maybe you could tell us something about that, Lee.
Well, it started a long time ago when I was a little boy in Charlottesville, Virginia, and I was next door neighbors to a kindly old man who used to come watch me play Little League Baseball. Turns out that man was William Faulkner, who was the writer in residence at the University of Virginia for the princely sum of $2,500 a year. That was back in the mid to late 50s, I have to confess. And our friendship started at that time, and it continued over half a century.
So tell us some of what you do as the executor.
Well, I started out helping Jill, his daughter, wrangle the literary rights, and it was not a popular body of work at the time. Hollywood goes through different phases. For periods of time, they don't rely on literary material. In the last decade to 15 years, they've relied a lot on literature, novels, short stories of known writers, and lately comic books. But 20 years ago, 25 years ago, when I started this with the Faulkner family as the executor of the literary estate, it was tough to get novels adapted, particularly William Faulkner's novels. They're hard to read. Sometimes they're hard to read even with the Cliff's Notes. And so what I started doing was adapting the books, finding writers who would just write spec scripts, and in some cases they were famous writers, such as Horton Foote, who many of you know, Tender Mercies, To Kill a Mockingbird and such, and even such writers as Lorenzo Semple Jr., who actually wrote 3 Days of the Condor and other thrillers, but who just on his own decided he was going to write a script based on one of Mr. Faulkner's novels, The Wild Palms, which will become a movie at some point in the near future.
Now, The Sound of the Fury was made into a movie before.
Yes, many, many years ago. It was a Hollywood movie using the title. I think it was Joanne Woodward was in it. And
Yul Brynner?
And Yul Brynner was in it. I forget who played Benji, but it was not a featured role. It was just a big lumbering guy who didn't have much to say and just sort of was quiet throughout the whole movie. What's interesting about James is the previous movie that I did, which was As I Lay Dying. He also played a schizophrenic who was more articulate. I'm not sure what James is up to, and most people are not. And but he seems to like those edgy roles, in this case not having any dialogue at all.
Well, tell us more about his affinity for William Faulkner and what he's trying to achieve. Because this is his second, you said, As I Lay Dying, which I strongly recommend. And that's on Netflix now.
That's Netflix
And that
now.
came out last year.
Yes, and that was at the Cannes Film Festival. This year we were at the Venice Film Festival. And we're going to do The Bear, which many of you have read or at least know about, probably the greatest coming-of-age story in American literature. And we're also going to do The Hamlet, which is part of what's called the Snopes trilogy. And there may be more, but there's an interesting YouTube video of him speaking at the Venice Film Festival, because he